Member for Ottawa South.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good evening to my colleagues and all Canadians who might be watching. Madam Speaker, it's an honour for me to rise this evening and speak to this motion. I have the good fortune of being the grandson of Irish pioneers who settled in the Ottawa Valley, and my great-grandparents lived very close to the Ottawa River. And there's a tradition, a very strong tradition, that runs through the veins of so many Canadians in this region and beyond who've been touched by the beauty and the stupendous power of the Ottawa River, which I've always described as the jewel in the crown of the National Capital Region. And I'm pleased to move it not only as the MP for Ottawa South, but also as the chair of the government's National Capital Region caucus. You know, Madam Speaker, there are now 1.4 million Canadians living in this catchment area called the National Capital Region, and we are growing at a rate of 7 to 8% a year. We're the 5th largest census metropolitan area in the country. This motion is calling for a study to revamp our thinking when it comes to managing the way we do our business, the way that we relate to something as essential as a watershed. It's an incredible opportunity for Canada, Madam Speaker, not just in the context of the Ottawa River watershed, but right across the country. I'll come back to that theme in a moment because there are many, many trends, many positive developments in this regard right across the country. But this is a case where we get to illustrate through the study the fact that we need a new form of management. We need a new form of co-management, which is widely described as integrated watershed management. And it tries to overcome a fundamental challenge when it comes to the way in which we organize our affairs as a society and how we interface with something as important as, for example, the Ottawa River, really how we interface with natural carrying capacity. And that is, it's to overcome the challenge of what my parents used to present to their 10 children, where they would say, we just can't have a situation where everybody's job is nobody's job. And when it comes to the Ottawa River watershed, and when it comes to watersheds writ large across this country and the planet, that's what we have to start addressing. Because although there are myriad actors, Madam Speaker, that interface or deal with the Ottawa River watershed, there's only one watershed. And that is one of the stark realizations that folks who live around the watershed provinces, the federal government, different actors, have now realized. That it's a delicate, important asset. It is, frankly, a very valuable asset that forms part of our overall natural capital. Natural capital. Not necessarily built capital or human capital, but our natural capital. So this motion is calling for a major study that would analyze how we can take the management of this Ottawa River watershed to the next level, to the next iteration. And in this, it has been informed by the good work of a number of examples in Canada. For example, the Fraser Basin Council in British Columbia, which began in early 1990 and has proceeded now in a very sophisticated way to bring together different stakeholders, different groups, who treat the Fraser Basin as one, because they realize it's an asset to be managed with great determination and with great care, because there's only one Fraser Basin. There aren't 10, there aren't 20, there's one. On that note, I'm also delighted to say that many stakeholders in this region are strongly supportive of conducting this study, not least among them the Ottawa Riverkeeper. And I really want to commend the Ottawa Riverkeeper and the team there, Meredith Brown and Jean Perrat in particular, for their extraordinary leadership and their work. They're to be congratulated on pushing out the envelope and thinking in terms of the opportunity here in front of us to do something very powerful in our national capital. And I think from here we can springboard and challenge national capitals right around the world. So we have many competing interests with the Ottawa River, but first of all, why this motion? Well, it's the border. The Ottawa River forms the border between Ontario and Quebec. It makes it an interprovincial waterway. So therefore, the management of the Ottawa River is an area of shared jurisdiction. Obviously, the federal government is implicated. The provincial governments of Ontario and Quebec, regional municipal governments, watershed organizations, and our Indigenous peoples. This motion recognizes the importance of the Ottawa River watershed to our overall economic, ecological, and our cultural well-being. So a comprehensive study on the creation of an Ottawa River Watershed Council would ensure that multiple levels of government, Indigenous peoples, and all stakeholders work closely together to coordinate their activities and their decisions that serve to protect and to preserve this incredible asset for all Canadians, this watershed. What kind of competing interests do we have when it comes to something as powerful as this Ottawa River? Which, by the way, Madam Speaker, for Canadians, they should know that the Ottawa River, its flow on a daily basis, is greater than every Western European tributary combined. It is a mighty, powerful river, and in large part helped build lots of early central Canada. Competing interests, for example, like economic ones, hydropower, tourism, forestry, fisheries, agriculture, or on the environment, water quality. This city, the city of Gatineau, abstracts most of its drinking water from the surface of the Ottawa River. Biodiversity, pollution, climate change. And within the Ottawa River watershed, there are 18 Ontario parks and 8 Quebec parks. When it comes to social well-being, as I referred a moment ago, we can speak to water quality, drinking water, flood risk, recreational purposes, and of course, river access. This river watershed, the Ottawa River watershed is a massive, as I say, big part of our local culture, our economy, our environment, and it's an asset. It is, as I said, the jewel in the crown. How big is it? The Ottawa River watershed covers more than 140,000 square kilometres. It straddles the border between Ontario and Quebec. It's also the largest tributary to the St. Lawrence River. It is very large, larger than many European states, larger than the province of New Brunswick. What's the present state of affairs now, Madam Speaker, when it comes to the management of this precious asset? Well, we have an Ottawa River Regulation Planning Board. It's the only governance body for the Ottawa River that includes both federal and provincial representatives, including Ontario Power Generation and Hydro-Quebec. It's mostly concerned with the question of hydroelectric energy production and, of course, flooding and other related issues. It does not allow for the broader mandate that this study would examine, where other stakeholders, a more diverse array of stakeholders, would come together and treat the watershed as one whole. Now, this is not simply something that is timely, Madam Speaker, in the context of this region and this particular watershed. On the contrary, the watershed movement, this whole question of evolving towards what is now being called integrated watershed management, is a national and international trend. It allows for a meeting place, an agora, as they said in ancient Greece, a place where you can manage human activities and ecosystems at the watershed scale. It would integrate multiple concepts and methods, including water and land use planning and management. It evaluates and manages cumulative effects from multiple environmental stressors. So if we have one municipality releasing waste into the river, and yet we have another organization like Atomic Energy of Canada dealing with the challenge of nuclear waste also along the shores of the Ottawa River, we have these different stressors at play, but we have no place to sit down collectively to say, how do we manage these collectively so we can ensure the sustainability of this important watershed? It brings together many aspects of governance, such as policy, planning, and legislation on the basis of a geographic area, this watershed approach. And it brings people together so that their activities can be shared and their relationships are better fostered amongst the different actors who live, who operate, who act, who have a bearing on the watershed. This is very important. It's something that exists right across the country. I alluded earlier to the Fraser Basin Council in British Columbia. Many of my BC colleagues here know full well how successful it has been, how it brings together dozens of stakeholders, how it has different meetings to be able to assess the overall health of the Fraser Basin Council, what different effects different activities are having on the Fraser Basin, because it frankly reflects the reality, as I said earlier, of the concept of there's only one Fraser Basin. And here, the study would examine the fact that there's only one Ottawa River watershed. So, what are some of the drivers for this integrated watershed management trend in Canada that this study might embrace? Well, we now know that environmental issues such as water are what they call multi-scale, Madam Speaker. We know that activities upstream are going to have a detrimental effect downstream. I'm reminded of what New York City did. Instead of building a multi-billion-dollar water treatment facility at the back end, they actually went upstream and they negotiated a series of deals with different municipalities, industries, First Nations, etc., to invest in cleaning up the river upstream, so by the time the water got to New York City, they had cleaner drinking water. And in fact, the cost of protecting that watershed in the context of Upper New York State was much lower than the cost of building a tertiary water treatment facility in New York City, treating it as it should be, as a form of natural capital to be protected and invested in. So, we also know now that it's just not desirable any longer or feasible to have a single water agency. This is clearly not working. We now know that water is connected through the hydrologic cycle, and groundwater and surface water have to be connected in our management activities. Recently, in a meeting I had with a senior senator from California, Mr. Speaker, I remember having a broad conversation, but the only thing he was fixated on talking about was whether or not California was going to have access to Canada's water and whether we would be performing interbasin water transfers. Not something that this country is particularly interested in seeing happen whatsoever, but we need to know what's happening to the hydrologic cycles, and this is something that can be analyzed through this study. We've got to recognize that there will be water shortages, flooding, water quality issues throughout the globe, including Canada. Southern Saskatchewan, the Red River, the Saguenay River, the Richelieu River, Walkerton, the Great Lakes, and many others. We also know that we have to consider and examine increased water users and types of water use, including the increased awareness of the need to better balance ecosystem needs and withdrawals, that this has led to more conflicts and more difficulty in overcoming the conflicts. The idea of having a watershed council allows us to diffuse, to deal with these conflicts up front, because we know collectively what's happening in the watershed basin as a whole. We know that Canadians everywhere now insist on more opportunity for participation, for community-based management approaches. The Council would provide such an opportunity. And there are many other drivers at play, not the least of which is that we appreciate that Aboriginal peoples living in parts of many watersheds, like here in the Ottawa Valley, throughout Canada rely on many water resource services, and they must be involved in the planning and management of those resources. So the case, Mr. Speaker, for the study to examine this Watershed Council, I think, is pretty darn strong. I think it's a question of sitting down with the right players, coming up with a management plan and strategy, coming up with the metrics that we need. We don't even have agreed upon metrics to evaluate the state of the watershed. And I'm convinced now that all actors, y compris le Québec, les municipalités de Gatineau, de l'autre côté de la rivière, tout ce qui touche la rivière, qui quand même a des milliers de kilomètres de longueur, voudraient participer dans le Conseil. So in closing, I'm asking my colleagues to support the notion that we would examine this in greater detail, study the possibility of having such an approach, use this as a wonderful opportunity to showcase what a national capital can do, not just in the context of other integrated watershed management approaches for Canada, Mr. Speaker, but globally. Let's start with Washington and the Potomac, for example, and expand beyond there. I think Canada's got this wonderful opportunity and obligation. I'm asking for my colleagues to support this motion in due course, and it's an honour for me to present it, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Questions.